Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to part two. Today, as promised, we'll talk about the translation itself. And when we say translation, we mean the translated text, the text that will be transferred into the target language. We're not talking about the translation process. And also, we are not talking about everything in translation, because translation itself is such a profound and deep topic that we won't be able to sum it up within a few minutes. To be specific, today we're going to talk about the cultural transfer, the challenges that a translator faces with the cultural transfer. We're going to talk about ways or some strategies that the translator may adopt to overcome some of the cultural transfers difficulties. And then we're going to talk about two types of translation, intralingual translation versus interlingual translation. And then we're going to talk about the added benefits of a good translation. Initially, cultural transfer is central to literary translation. Like literary translation is the field of cultural transfer. That doesn't apply. Our cultural transfer is a concept that's rarely addressed in technical translation. So it's exclusive as far as I'm concerned. It's exclusive to literary translation. Cultural transfer is subject to, or the difficulty of cultural transfer, the challenge, is subject to three things. Number one, the kinship between the language of the source text and the language of the target text. The second thing is the reader's knowledge of the culture of the source text. And finally, the nature of the text at hand and the purpose of translating it. As you see, we're reverting back to the purpose of translation, which we covered in part one. Let's talk about the kinship between the language and the culture of the source text and the target text. For instance, the least level of challenge would exist between the Frisian or Frisian, however you would like to pronounce it, the Frisian culture and language and the English language, because they are very close to one another. So the cultural challenge is very mitigated, it's almost suppressed when you translate a text from Frisian into English or from English into Frisian. But this level might be a bit elevated if you are translating a text from German to Hungarian or from Hungarian to German, because there is a language dissimilarity, but there is a cultural similarity. So language as an aspect of a culture definitely will come into the mix, but you would see that the difficulty would be linguistic difficulty, but not so much of cultural difficulty. Now, this challenge level will come to its highest if you are translating from English to Zulu or from Zulu to English, because these are two different culture and language. So the dissimilarity both in culture and language is pretty high, and this is where a translator is likely to face the highest level of challenge. Are there ways to deal with that? Yeah, there are. First way is not to deal with the challenge at all. Translate it the way it is and just like leave the challenge for the reader to handle. Do I advise for that? Not all the time. Actually, I believe that a reader of literary work would definitely need to exert his brain muscle a little bit to enjoy the text that he's reading, but at the same time, the translator should not throw him to the wolves. So sometimes if glossing over the challenge, if the challenge is trivial or the challenge is not addressable, like you really don't need to spend the time or really work all your translation tricks to address the challenge, that would be something that you will leave for the reader. Or using equivalencies, for instance. The Hispanic culture has bad days and the Anglo-Saxon culture has bad days. So for instance, the Tuesday the 13th is a Sinister Day in Hispanic culture or Hispanic language, while it's Friday the 13th. That is a bad day or a Sinister Day or a bad omen day in English culture or in Saxon culture. So can a translator translate Tuesday the 13th into Friday the 13th, depending on the direction of the translation? Yes. So if I'm translating a text from Spanish into English, and I just came across Tuesday the 13th, well, I can translate that into Friday the 13th. And then maybe you follow that with a footnote or something. Also, spring in England, the weather is good, or summer in England is as good as spring in the tropics. So you will find so many people who have translated the Shakespearean sonnet. They have, where Shakespeare mentioned summer, well, summer is such a beautiful season in England, but it's very hellish in the tropics or in the Middle East or any kind of, within this geographical area. So some translators actually translated summer into spring. Also, you can translate it the way it is and then footnote it. You can do that. But if you are going to use footnote, be very judicious regarding this, because you don't want to distract the reader with footnotes, okay? This is something that, yes, it's a technique, it's there, it should be still used judiciously. Or you can really bend and stretch the target text to its fullest. And this is where some foreign elements will carry over from the source text into the target text. And the reader may appreciate that or may not. So using one strategy depends on the context, it also depends on the judgment of the translator and also on the context of the translation. I will stop here because this clip is coming close to 9 minutes, and in order for me to be able to upload it, it will have to be less than 10 minutes. So I will stop here and then we'll pick up on the other or the remaining 2 points in a different clip. I will see you then.